Good evening, campers. Welcome to the Patreon exclusive episode, Matilda. I'm Zach.
I'm B.
So when we started bringing up Roald Dahl, B was getting super excited about this because Roald Dahl is either their greatest enemy or greatest friend.
Yeah. Yeah. We have a very fraught relationship, I would say, me and the old roly-poly. That's not a nickname that I have for him. I just
What is
made
Roald
that up.
Dahl's? Does Roald Dahl have a nickname?
I think he must have. I mean, he was both in boarding school and in the Air Force, so he must have had a nickname, but I can't think of anything at the time. He probably did. He was in a lot of weird institutions with weird people, so...
You're more than welcome to give the complete and utter history of Roald Dahl, B.
I mean, it's a whole long story. The main things you gotta know about Roald Dahl is that he went to boarding school, and that messed him up a lot. Because, of course it will. Especially, the kind of boarding school he went to, the specific kind of British boarding school where, corporal punishment was, still super a thing, where, the teachers had, paddles specifically assigned to, the children. You're seeing a lot of echoes of that in a book like Matilda. There's also, when you weren't being corporally punished by the teachers, you were getting that from your peers as well through weird hazing and stuff. And to get back at people, you committed pranks and did kind of weird complicated schemes to get back at adults. So I do think in a weird way Matilda's based in a lot of reality.
Who is Roald Dahl and what type of books he's written? Because a lot of people, they know the books, but they might not know who wrote them.
Yeah, I mean, it's really funny, right? Because I remember distinctly I was photocopying something for my thesis, and someone working in the office, on campus, said, "Oh, what is that for?" And I explained my thesis briefly, and she was like, "Oh, who's Roald Dahl?" And I was like, "Oh, you probably know him, Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, Matilda, the BFG, James and Giant Peach is another big one." She was like, "Oh yeah, I've heard of all of those." She just, didn't connect them as, the same.
It's, a weird thing, especially, with, James and the Giant Peach, and it's such associated with Tim Burton, even though he had nothing to do with that movie.
Yeah, it's Henry Selick to begin with, but he's a weird guy. I mean, to answer the question, who is Roald Dahl, is to give you the 70 pages I tried to write about it, and maybe not totally successfully in the sense that I didn't come to a super concise conclusion about what that means to define him as a person. He was really complicated and strange. He had really strong morals in some ways. He believed in justice, and he believed in that children have this innate goodness in them to some extent.
Humans, or I guess adults, are really terrible people.
Yeah, I mean, that's kind of the thesis of everything he's ever written, is that humans are terrible, especially adult humans. They're a specific subset of humanity where it's children have this I guess loophole where they see things differently, or they haven't been corrupted somehow by having to grow up, so they still have a chance to be redeemed. I mean, you even look at something like Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, where the kids are bad, but really the parents are bad. The reason the kids are bad is because the parents are bad at parenting. So it's kind of more a condemnation of adults than it ever is about children, because it doesn't really hold them responsible for the way that they're acting, because it's oh yeah, you're just a victim of circumstances because your parents are awful.
I mean, isn't it kind of nature versus nurture argument?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think he ever thought that kids don't have innate natures too, and I'm sure that there are examples of kids who are bad. I'm trying to think of an example in one of his books where there's an evil kid. I mean, even Matilda's brother in this, he's kind of just a non-character.
Well, he's more he just goes with the flow. He doesn't really care.
Yeah, he's not evil. He just has kind of no.
He doesn't know better.
Personality or something. He's not Dudley Dursley or something where he's.
Well, I mean, I guess the best example to give of that actually is Carmelita Spatz in Series of Unfortunate Events.
Yeah, exactly. There's no real character like that I could. I mean, there's characters like that, I guess, in Willy Wonka, right? What's her name? Veruca Salt is totally the same kind of character. The difference is you never see Carmelita Spatz's parents. Well, the whole idea that she's so spoiled rotten is because her parents are giving her everything that she ever wanted.
I mean, I would imagine that's kind of maybe that's what Carmelita was based off of, was Veruca Salt, because...
Oh yeah, I mean, I see a lot of really strong Roald Dahl reference, not even necessarily references, but just
homages.
Sort of homages in Lemony Snicket's work. There's a lot of tonal similarities in the way that they write. There's the absurdity aspect. There's also the way that it characterizes children versus adults and kind of like the inherent injustice in being a kid, like especially like how like helpless you feel. Like there's like a specific line early in Matilda where she's just really frustrated with like the way that her parents keep calling her ignorant and terrible just because they won't listen to her, and she just feels so like, yeah, she feels so mischaracterized by them because they just won't listen to her. And I think that that's like a very, maybe not a universal experience as a child, but especially if you're like a precocious kid, or maybe the kind of kid who would read a Roald Dahl book, for instance, you probably would relate to the idea of like, yeah, I am smart and precocious and people don't take me seriously or whatever. And that's totally like a Lemony Snicket thing too, to cast the kids as like these prodigy geniuses who actually have a lot to say, and then like these babbling useless adults who are either like overtly evil or they're kind of ineffectual in helping people. So there's definitely like that big overlap in like the way they characterize like that difference. The weird thing about Roald Dahl is like in his kids' books, it's somewhat played for laughs, right? Like there's a lot of like,
well, I mean, there's like a lot of absurd things that happen to these books. Like, especially, I can use. We should be using Matilda as an example, but like Charlie and the Chocolate Factory, there's so many more absurd things. Like, of course, Willy Wonka's got a shrink ray. Of course, Willy Wonka has golden gooses. Of course, there's a river made out of chocolate.
Or even just like the physical nature of like the villains are always like, they're so grotesque in like a cartoonish way that it's made to be funny.
Their undoing is basically themselves being themselves.
Yeah, like a fatal flaw in some way. Yeah, that's definitely a thing as well.
Keep using Charlie and Chocolate, but like Veruca Salt, she wants a golden goose and she steps on the little plate.
Yeah, like the irony.
Yeah,
or
that
whatever.
she's a bad egg.
Yeah, I think also, yeah, I think Dahl has a specific fixation on like, almost like Hammurabi Code-esque justice, where it's like an eye for an eye. Like this thing happens to you in like this very ironic way that punishes you for doing a wrong. That's like how comeuppances work in his mind.
Well, I mean, isn't that supposed to be like dramatic irony?
Yeah, I think he really loves dramatic irony. Just like the way that someone's evil motivations can be turned against them in some way, or like even something as simple as like, I mean, like early on in Matilda, we see like the different pranks that Matilda tries to play on her dad, and how it's like they're kind of punishing him for the different flaws he has, like, oh, like this hair tonic that he puts on his head.
Because he's afraid of losing his hair.
Because he's like, so, yeah, he's like vain. So this is like his punishment for that, is that it's also his punishment for treating Matilda terribly, but like it's like this twist that's like, okay, well, if he wasn't so vain that he put this on his head every day, then he wouldn't be vulnerable to this kind of prank to begin with.
Well, same as with selling used cars with like sawdust in them, ends up becoming his undoing in the end of the book.
Yeah, exactly. And the whole time he's just justifying it and saying, oh, well, I'm very clever that I came up with these different ways of like pulling a fast one on people.
And I think like some of them are like the funniest. Like, I guess we should like try to get more into the book. There's like a really interesting like simplicity about this book as well, and how it's not a really thick book, but it has a lot of weight to it, especially with like the beautiful illustrations by Quentin Blake.
I love the illustrations. I honestly, like, rereading this really made me consider, like, would I want to get a tattoo of a Quentin Blake illustration? Because they're so interestingly done. Like, they're very, they're almost childlike in the way that
they're very scribbly, but, like, they capture, like, Matilda's, like, I guess, I really wish we had Meg on here, because she could probably explain all this stuff, but, like, Matilda is more all straight lines and stuff, and then you look at the adults, they're all, like, squiggly lines, pretty much. Like these.
Yeah, I mean, like, there's also a lot of use of gesture in like the way that he illustrates the different characters. Yeah, I mean, that's like also it corresponds very well to the way Dahl like has like a weird morality to the way people look. And this, I've talked about this before, where like kids' books are reductive a lot of ways when it comes to like physical characterizations. Like, if someone's evil, they usually are fat or balding, or they have like kind of a big nose, or like they have a big boil on their face or something. Like it's kind of equating.
Well, I mean, it's supposed to be for any person. It's like a judgment call. It's like,
yeah, you're ugly on the outside as you are on the inside. It's like a very common characterization.
To some extent, it's a total fallacy, But
Yeah.
I guess like with Doll, it's more like it's not. It's like everything you have to take at face value. This
Yeah,
person's
everyone's personality is reflected externally. Like Miss Honey is so nice that she is so pretty also. Like she's, you know.
and she's only 23.
Yeah. Oh my god, she's younger than me. That's so
Isn't it like such a
weird.
like your this parental figure is only 23?
I would never adopt a child. Even if I met like a prodigy child like Matilda and I was like, wow, you really need to be protected from your abusive family, I would call CPS. I wouldn't just have her at my house. Anyway, that's just another story. She's 23. I'm 24. That's crazy. Anyway, that's.
I'm 22, and I'm at the same age as Buddy Holly when he died. I guess the best way to put this book, because we should just tackle it, because it's when I think of Matilda, I always think of either Charles Dickens or just reading. Like that's like the interesting thing about Matilda is like it opens up.
It's a book about books.
It's a book about books, but it's like you have the books. The main character is Matilda, who is like this little girl. I think she's like 4 when the book starts.
Yeah, I think she is.
She teaches herself how to read,
On her own by like looking at newspapers, basically.
and it's the most adorable thing. And her parents.
Oh my god, the illustration is incredibly precious of just like little baby Matilda sitting on the pile of papers.
Yeah, and they're like bigger than she is.
Oh, so small.
I love that about this, and it's like her parents don't care. Her dad's like a used car salesman, and
Yeah.
her mom plays bingo every night. Mm-hmm. And it's like such a weird thing because I used to help out with like a bingo nights, or I would go to someone that was doing bingo nights, and there would be people like this that would always come to bingo. So it's a really funny thing.
Yeah, it's a specific caricature of like a very vapid person from like the mid-century, I guess, like always in front of the TV, doesn't really have a job. She's kind of like a housewife. I mean, I could say that that's like somewhat rooted in sexism, but it's not like her husband is doing any better. He works, but his job, his livelihood
very
is
sleazy.
basically
It doesn't
lying to
really matter.
people.
It's not like-
Yeah, so
I mean,
at the very least she's not actively lying to people.
no. I mean, she's not like Petunia in Harry Potter. Mm-hmm. And how I mean, she is not a vindictive person, but she's like, she doesn't really care. That's the problem. Like,
She's not as horrible as the dad, I would say. She's just kind of more, she's more hands off.
yeah, she's laissez-faire. Like the dad, he's like a used car salesman, but like, I would like to put like quotations over used cars
Yeah.
because they, like, I'm afraid like you turn this on, these cars are going to explode because like
Yeah, they're just barely held together.
like they're barely held together cars, but he'll charge like an insane amount because his number one trick, his secret of the business is oil with sawdust.
Putting sawdust. Yeah, which I don't
Will blow
really
your car up.
totally get.
And I love it because in the book, he's like, oh, the reason why we do this is because you'll get about a good 100 miles and then they will never come back. It's like such a weird
Stranded
thing.
forever. It's like, yeah, like before you judge someone, walk a mile in their shoes because then you're a mile away and you have their shoes.
And you'll be too lazy to come back to complain, even though you spent a lot of money on this used car, which I actually, in preparation for this review, I actually went back and watched the Matilda with Mara Wilson, which is a very good movie. I think
a
Danny
classic.
DeVito does a really good job directing it. Though the only complaint about the movie is I really wish he didn't cast himself as the dad.
As the narrator and the dad, yes. It's super confusing, right? Because he has such a distinct Danny DeVito voice.
And it's not even that. It's just like, look how horrible I am to this child. And Mara Wilson or little Matilda.
It's like, Matilda was sad because she was smart and all of her family were a bunch of morons. And then it's like the same voice. Like,
yeah, it's like, wait,
yeah.
what?
Like, I get that he directed it and, like, he cast his wife as his wife and blah, 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 but, like, they could have got a different narrator.
They could have, but I mean, that's like the only gripe I've ever had about that movie.
Yeah, I have the same complaint, I would say. I haven't rewatched it recently, but I think it's pretty well committed to memory at this point. I've seen it a lot of times, just generally on cable or whatever. It's just one of those things that I grew up with.
But it's like also then you have like these themes because as Matilda grows kind of older, like maybe like a year older, she suddenly becomes like this latchkey kid.
Yeah, where they're just like, they just don't care about her at all, and she just wanders to the library, and they're just like, whatever, have fun. Like, they're like, oh, your mom must drop you off every day, and then she's like, no, I'm just walking. Like,
Just imagine like a 5-year-old like walking to the library. Oh my
and
god.
like no one notices that this baby is toddling along. I mean,
No, this is like England, so like kids were probably still working in factories.
yeah, right. They're still making Wonka's candy. Oh no, that's just colonialist labor where they kidnap all the Oompa Loompas.
But what is it? But yeah, so she finds escape in the library. And it's kind of, this is a really weird thing because I read a lot of books and authors, and like I guess my favorite example I guess is with Ray Bradbury. Like that's kind of, it's a very similar thing. Like, oh, they found themselves in the library.
Yeah, I mean, Lemony Snicket too. That's another big overlap with Lemony Snicket, is like the real like idealization of books and people who read. Like it's also like it's like a very specific one-to-one moral thing where
Like
it's
if
like
you don't read books, you're evil.
if you don't read books, you're evil kind of thing. Yeah, exactly.
Well, I mean, it's kind of like, I think
It's a touch classist, like maybe not classist, but like sort of
well, I think okay. So
Yeah.
how I would rationalize it
it's
is
complicated.
the way they rationalize it. I don't know. This might not be the intention, but it's like books. Libraries are pretty much like a free resource, like in the United States. I don't know what it's like in other countries.
Yeah.
And it's like you could either be reading and learning and doing all these wonderful things, like your imagination is such a wonderful thing, or you could be watching the television and basically rotting your brains. Even though now it's less. It's like I think you have to like realize, our listeners, it's like when these books were written, this is like literally TV shows were puppets, like Howdy Doody and like I Love Lucy. Like
Hold on.
situational
When was
comedies
Matilda first published?
in the 80s.
In the 80s, yeah, that's what I thought.
So you had Cheers going on. You had like great shows, but like
Yeah, 1988.
in 1988. So yeah,
So I don't know when it takes place exactly. Do they specifically...
I would imagine. I always usually place it when the book is written, unless they say otherwise.
Yeah, it's kind of like ahistorical. It's just kind of like this... It's like vaguely mid-century, like the way that the dad dresses and stuff could indicate that maybe it's like the 60s or something.
It's at a point of like indeterminate 19th century or 20th century aesthetic. I mean, the idea is like you could be like you're pretty much like squandering your time doing nothing rather than you could be reading books and learning.
Yeah, I do think it's like a very heavy-handed, like, read books, good. Don't read books, bad kind of thing, which, you know.
I think there's also like a sense of irony because you're reading a book for a book to tell you to read more books.
Oh, yeah, there's absolutely that aspect too. It's like, you know what you're advertising to. The kind of kid who would read a book like Matilda is the kind of kid who would relate to Matilda. It's this like kind of catch-22 thing. The kind of kid who would be obsessed with unfortunate events would be the kind of kid who goes, oh, I see myself in the Baudelaires. And that's just how it works. There's a specific kind of like bookish kid who will relate to this like, you know, specific, honestly, it's a little bit of a made up trope to some extent that there's a kid who is specifically singled out because they're smart. Maybe by their peers, but not necessarily by their parents, if anything. That's like...
No, because a lot of the times it's like parents are like, oh my gosh, I have like a super kid.
Yeah.
Like,
I mean, they even specifically say that in this book, that it's way more common to encounter parents who talk up their kind of dim-witted children, and they don't acknowledge that their kids have limits in some ways.
But this is like the rare example of
this.
where it's the opposite. And
yeah, she's like a prodigy, basically.
yeah, and it's like it's really interesting because, you know, Matilda gets older and she starts doing all these pranks because, like, her dad is physically the worst human being because, like, he takes, like, library books and, like, rips them up. And then he's like, why aren't you watching the television? And, like, I wonder why you don't hang out with us type of things. Like, well, there's an obvious reason. And it's like, I love these little pranks that she does because they're so harmless, but not really. Like, what was it? One of them, like, she glues his hat to his head.
Yeah, she glues his hat on, then they cut it off, and he has, like, this weird sort of cut-up hat.
Which they do in the movie, and I think it's hilarious.
Yes, it's a very funny visual gag, for sure. And then she puts peroxide in his fancy hair tonic that he puts on his head to keep it shiny and dark. That's what also makes me think this is probably 50s, 60s sometime, because that's, like, totally the age of, like, people putting weird tonics on their head.
Well, also, it's like, what was it? I took a class in business advertising, and it was, like, in the 50s. Like, it was, like, the way it's written... If it was in the 50s, it would be really interesting because that's a more vain thing to do because dyeing your hair back then was considered more vain. Like, oh, you're not a natural blonde.
Well, I mean, the mom dyes her hair.
Yes, so it's like, yeah. So if it's in the 50s, it's a more interesting thing. It's like only after like the 60s when people really started dyeing their hair to become like a
I think they're definitely trying to make a point that these people are tacky.
Yes, they're very tacky.
Which,
I mean, in the movie,
again, like a little bit of a classist coded thing where it's like, oh, this character is gross because they dress a certain way or like they look. And there's also a description of the mom that she's like overweight. Like again, their characterization is really based off of a lot of specific physical things.
The one thing that I love about the movie is they kind of do that with their clothing. How they have like these really tacky outfits that they think are adorable.
Yeah, I mean, to some extent, the dad is tacky, but he's in the book, but in the movie, I would say it's like really brought home that he has like these really loud suits and this like kind of ugly hat.
I mean, it's really funny as well. It's like Danny DeVito cast himself in pretty much like
as a trashy guy.
As a trashy guy.
It's pretty funny. He typecast himself as a dirtbag.
Well, he knows what he does, and it's really like it just reminds me of Always Sunny in Philadelphia, where his wrestler name wants to be the Trash Man. Mm-hmm. It's like stuff like that. Then Matilda actually gets the opportunity of a lifetime. She gets to go to school.
Yeah, that's what she wanted all along. And basically, she probably could have gotten there sooner if her parents were like actually paying attention to the fact that she should go to school.
Well, I mean, like in the movie, I think it's more interesting because like it's apparently a private school, not a public school. I kind of like that more in the book.
It's a private school in both, I thought.
No, but like she gets accepted into the private school in the book because instead of selling the car for money, here you can do it this way. Because Trunchbull is trying to like swindle him while he's trying to swindle her.
It's like a big difference between the book and the movie is that this is very clearly British. There's a lot of British like language things.
I mean, it's kind of like, well, Roald Dahl was an English writer, so it's like the saying, write what you know.
Yeah, it's not, something like a lot of children's books are sort of like of no specific setting.
Well, I mean, there's certain authors like C.S. Lewis.
Yeah.
I mean, Turkish delights are the grossest things in the world, so.
I love Turkish delights.
I hate Turkish delights.
Maybe you just haven't had the right one. I had a fig kind that was very good. I would sell my family for that Turkish delight. Anyway.
And then you also have like people like Tolkien, and then you have people like Roald Dahl who are very like they write British.
Yeah, I mean, there's like a lot of British colloquialisms in this. Like they call the TV the telly and certain things like that. Which I remember as a kid being like, what? Because I had seen the movie before. I read the book and I was like so confused that they spoke that way. I was like, what's wrong with these people?
Like I said, it's like write what you know, same as with direct what you know. They could have made it an all-British production of Matilda, but because it's Dan DeVito, the only person that is British is Trunchbull. So, yeah.
Because it's like, it's a good villain voice to have.
British is always the best villain voice to have.
Yeah, usually.
But then it's like, so Matilda goes to school, and it's like a weird twist where all the kids are very, not that they're not nice, but like Matilda's so smart that she kind of like alienates herself from everyone else.
Yeah, I mean, she like does make friends, but she clearly stands out against them, especially like immediately Miss Honey notices that she's a different caliber of student. Like this is like kindergarten essentially, and these kids don't know anything because it's like, why would they?
I mean, what you know in kindergarten, basically the shapes and colors, and maybe how to spell your name.
They're not reading Dickens or Hemingway. They barely know their times tables, and she like shows up and she can do like mental math, and she can like
she's basically
read
like
a poem
a savant
and name that it's a limerick
point.
And all that stuff. Yeah, she's literally a savant.
Like, why wasn't she recruited by like NASA?
Well, NASA's America, so
they do outsource.
That's true.
But
yeah.
I mean, it's such a weird thing as well as like. She there's this whole part where she just starts doing mental math and like it gets to like crazy numbers and she can do them. This is where we get introduced to Mrs. Trunchbull,
also known as the Trunchbull.
The Trunchbull.
I want to find the description of her because it's horrifying.
Because in my head, I imagine the actress that actually plays Mrs. Trunchbull.
Yeah, me too. I did. She's like a viscerally horrifying kind of character.
Well, it's also funny because she's also Marge in Harry Potter.
Oh, you're right. She is. Yeah, that's
like she's really good at playing awful people. But I'm pretty sure, obviously, that means she's probably like the sweetest person in the world.
Yeah, she probably is, honestly. Have you seen the video where the Matilda cast, like,
Yes.
kind of did a reunion, and the guy who played Bruce Bogtrotter ate the cake? Yeah, he's, like, handsome now and thin, which is very funny. He, like, Neville Longbottomed.
I love that and just I just remember like the reaction of like Mara Wilson, like they bring out this cake and she's like, "What?"
But yeah, the description of Trunchbull is she was a gigantic holy terror, a fierce tyrannical monster who frightened the life out of the pupils and teachers alike. There was an aura of menace about her even at a distance.
Rewatching the movie, I noticed something about Matilda and also Trunchbull. Is that this is really nerdy, but every time they did like a close-up shot or anything that had to do with the parents or Mrs. Trunchbull, they would do Dutch angles to make it really
Oh
uncomfortable.
yeah, they would. That's like a super noticeable thing. The Dutch angle is like the sort of like, oh, like the kind of off kilter look.
And then they would like super get in your face, like extreme close-ups. It's like which works.
Yeah, because she's like very imposing and also kind of like disorienting.
And I like how like the way to describe her also is like she's like this really ugly, strong person that was an Olympian.
Yeah, she's a weird character. Also, like her her weird hatred of children.
I was never
is
one
so
as a kid.
Funny. Yeah, like just my idea of a perfect school is one that has no children in it at all. You know,
like, what is
like,
it? I think was even they use children should be seen and not heard.
oh yeah, there's like where they should be like put away inside of a box. What is it? She just wants to like put them away where they can't be seen.
How ironic for a person that runs an elementary school.
Yeah, no, she's like disgusted by the very idea of children. Like a few of the quotes that she says about children. I don't like small people. Small people should never be seen. Oh, here's the one. Yeah, should never be seen by anybody. They should be kept out of sight in boxes like hairpins and buttons. I cannot for the life of me see why children have to take so long to grow up. I think they do it on purpose.
Like, was she like never a kid? Like, did she come out as like a 40-year-old
there's
witch?
one part where she says, "Oh, like I'm glad that I was never a little girl." Like when they're talking, when Miss Honey goes to tell her of the amazing prodigy that has appeared in her classroom, Miss Trunchbull's like very dismissive of this, and then she's like, "Little girls are terrible. They're even worse than little boys because they're harder to deal with." And then she says, "Good thing I was never one." And it's
Like, does that
what
mean
is
like
that?
she was just birthed and she was already like a 4-year-old witch?
She just like hatched out of. Actually, that's like a line that Mr. Poe says in the Unfortunate Events adaptation. I'm pretty sure on Netflix, as he says he's glad he was never a child. Yeah, never had a childhood. So it's like it's a very common thing to like have antagonists just be like, "Oh, I hate kids." Also, I was never a kid. I don't remember being a kid.
Like, that seems like such a weird thing unless you had like a very awful childhood.
Yes, I mean, I really do think this is Roald Dahl, maybe not tooting his own horn, but like, I think he has a very specific philosophy about childhood, and as someone who dealt with a lot of difficult things when he was a kid, who faced a lot of like unfair authority figures, he viscerally remembers what it's like to be a kid and to feel that kind of injustice. So I think he's judgmental of the kind of adult who separates themselves from childhood, who doesn't remember what that's like.
I think what Roald Dahl is trying to say here is that there's two types of people that were robbed of their childhood and people that have amazing childhoods.
I don't even think he's saying that, right? Because, I mean, Matilda, to some extent, had her childhood not robbed from her, but she does have a difficult childhood because of her parental figures.
But the difference with Matilda is at the end, she gets what she wants, and that's she gets a loving family.
Yeah, she does. I mean, well, because it's like a power fantasy, right? Like, that's the entire point.
Yeah, no, okay, if we're talking about like power fantasies here, like Matilda has like the world's greatest power fantasy because
yes, that's
like
the whole book, right? Like,
because what is it in the movie? Matilda's the only person that stands up to Trunchbull.
Yeah.
Whereas, like
In the book, it's
there's
more
like
of like
several
a
people.
united front where they're like, oh, it's like a war zone here, and we're trying our best, and they're playing pranks on
It's
her.
like
and
a
stuff.
weird like this entire book is like a little girl's power trip where she actually gets like we'll get into that I guess where it's like there's one part where Trunchbull comes in like I'm gonna teach the class and she's like basically berating these poor children.
Yeah, she just comes in and she just yells at them for no reason. You know, she's like, "Oh, recite the multiplication tables backwards," like just
backwards.
Yeah, like just pointless busy work things. Again, another super popular children's literature thing: the criticism of like the institution of education by like showing how absurd it can be sometimes, while also like idealizing learning.
See, that reminded me of a thing that actually got me out of wanting to do film in college.
Yeah.
Which was I had a teacher, and he was a really cool dude, really awesome dude. Except for our final, we had to write, I'm not even going to exaggerate, paragraphs and paragraphs of like lines of text, but we had to write them 10 times each, and there were like 40 of them.
Yeah, it's like
so
the Bart
I spent
Simpson
an entire
thing.
weekend. No. So I spent the entire week doing this, and like I was so tired. Like, this is what consumed my life for like 4 days. I wasn't getting sleep. I wasn't eating. And then at the end, like none of them did it except for me and 2 other people. Like, to finish it, and like, you know what? I don't really want to do this anymore. Everyone gets credit.
Yeah.
And it's like I kind of like ruined like my experience at college at that moment.
Yeah, it's pretty messed up, honestly.
It was weird. It's like, oh wait, don't use a computer because you can just copy and paste this.
Yeah, I had a similar assignment in high school where we had to like copy down poems by hand.
But these were paragraphs and about nothing.
Yeah. I mean, like we had to just like type them out even though we could copy and paste. It was busy work. It was ridiculous. But yeah, basically this is like a super common theme in children's books. I think Roald Dahl is this is definitely like the main one that criticizes like academia, which is definitely something that he dealt with as a student. Like the weird arbitrary rules that authority figures come up with.
Yeah, no, and then there's also the part where it's like Trunchbull's also like a weird like eye for an eye masochist.
Yeah. She's a psychopath.
Like the cake. Do I need to say more?
Yeah, the cake is infamous, the scene with Bruce Bogtrotter and his like weird like torture, like just
I'd rather say not talk about it, but like you can't because it's like I just like imagine like I know like Roald Dahl wrote all his books in like a little garden shack. Just imagine
the
him.
Gypsy House, which is a bit of a problematic name for what it was, but you know, he was a old British man who kind of liked colonialism, so he doesn't really
just sitting in this shack and just like writing this really disgusting scene. Like,
yeah,
like it's like one day someone's gonna make a film with us where they do the exact same thing but extreme close-ups, and they have like this really sad, depressed kid that just looks like he's gonna throw up any second.
Yeah, but then it's also like a triumph too, because he beats her at her own game. Is this, oh, you're not gonna be able to finish it? It's like, oh, but he finished it all somehow. Bruce was able to shove all that cake into his mouth,
but barely. But yeah, no. But then like Matilda starts to get these powers. Like the first time was because Trunchbull came to her class, and I guess one little girl's put a newt in their like water specifically set aside for.
God, what is her friend's
Trunchbull.
name? Lavender.
Yes. And Trunchbull accuses Matilda of doing it because she picks people, and because her dad kept telling Trunchbull that
that she was like a terrible child. Yeah, and she just believed him.
Problem child because she hates children. So.
Yeah, she'll believe any kind of mean thing about children.
And, like, Matilda starts, like, knocks the glass of water over with her mind.
She's like, oh my god, I just did a brain trick, like some sort of 11 or something.
And, like, her nose starts bleeding. Oh my god.
Basically, Matilda is, like, 11 good ending.
Well, no, it's not, no. I think it's Carrie good ending. Like, Carrie actually got fun.
Yeah, no, it's more Carrie good ending, you're right. But yeah, she has, like, these telekinesis powers.
I think this is the problem that I had with this book, is that the moral of the story is you need one kind soul, or you can easily become, like, a little child psychopath. Because Matilda could have easily have been, like, if she didn't have, like, Miss Honey, she could have, like, turned all the kids and all the parents' brains into mush and, like, ruled the world. Because apparently, like, this is, I don't know, it's like a weird thing where it's like she starts gaining these powers. It's almost like, did you ever watch the movie Lucy with ScarJo?
No.
In the movie, Scarlett Johansson, I think it's like a drug runner, and like she hides drugs in her body.
Okay.
And I guess these drugs are like supposed to make people really smart or something, or I forget. But the bags break in her body, so she starts.
Oh my god.
So she starts getting superpowers because like she's unlocking parts of her brain until she uses like 100% of her brain.
Which is also a misconception about science
Sir,
and how it works.
She's hacking the internet with her brain.
Yeah, like that whole like you only use X% of your brain thing like isn't true. You use 100% of your brain, just not simultaneously, because there's no reason to.
Or you'll get a brain seizure.
Yeah, but there's no reason to use 100% of your brain all the time.
They proved if you actually have a seizure, you're actually using 100% of your brain.
Yeah, do you want to have a seizure? No, that's not a fun time for anybody, so.
Matilda is like this interesting case of, it's like, using your powers for good, but like luckily in a nice checked position because she could easily have become like Magneto.
Yeah, it's really beneficial to the narrative that Matilda isn't only smart academically, but she's like emotionally smart. At one point, even Miss Honey points this out that she says she's like, you're like a child adult or something, where it's like she also is very mature and understanding of like the gravity of the powers that she has, and she feels like she needs to be responsible and, you know, take a step back and think, oh, what are these powers? Are they dangerous? Should I not use them in case they make me sick? Like she really like considers different aspects of this thing that like most, you know, 5-year-olds would be like, yay, I have powers. Like,
well, is that because she's read so many books, such as like Moby Dick,
where she knows how power can like overtake you?
How power can like absolute power can corrupt.
Yeah,
that's because I like the character of Miss Honey because Miss Honey invites her to go to her house for tea, and it turns out that Miss Honey lives in pretty much a
sadness shack.
Like
well, it's pretty on the outside and kind of sparse on the inside.
No, I just love it's like Roald Dahl. I think he just like loves like cottages. Like it's a wonderful cottage. It's like it's got no power or bathrooms, but
yeah,
like
a real
it's
romantic
a wonderful
cottage.
A real romantic
where
cottage.
she has to take sponge baths.
This is the part that made me reminded me of a scene from Bride of Frankenstein where Frankenstein's monster goes into a cabin with a blind man, and they have like this. I think it's one of the greatest scenes in all of film history, where they have like this interaction where they're both outsiders. The blind man just wants to have a friend, and
he just makes tea for him.
Makes tea and gives him like pretty much all of his food and stuff. And it's kind of like the same thing here because they both are considered outsiders. Like they both didn't. Miss Honey didn't have a good childhood. Matilda is starting to have a terrible childhood.
I'm having a terrible childhood right now.
Oh, wait till the readers of the Daily Punctilio read about this.
Yeah, if you haven't read or watched Unfortunate Events, you probably don't get 99% of the references we ever make, so...
Oh, apparently we've turned people to, like, read these books.
Yeah, because we make, like, all these oblique references, and you have to, like, decode what we're saying.
Isn't it, like, such a funny thing? It's, like, this one thing that brought us all together.
I got a message recently where someone said, I really like the podcast you do with Tyler. I'm thinking of reading the Percy Jackson series just so I could listen to your other podcast.
We did it.
We converted people. I haven't finished the first book, and I'm already converting people into the Percy Jackson series.
The interesting thing that I love about, like, again, Miss Honey is she doesn't let her, like, nature or I guess her environment affect her because her aunt's Miss Trunchbull, as we find out, because she lost both of her parents.
Yeah, it's like a big record scratch plot twist that her aunt is Miss Trunchbull.
You could see from a mile away.
Yeah, I mean, it's like, oh, she's terrible and treated me so unfairly. I wonder who this terrible, unfair person is.
But in the end, I still love her, and she gave me a job.
Yeah, that sure is abuse, isn't it? That sure is abuse.
The difference between, I guess, her and Trunchbull, and I mean, yes and no. She actually leaves the house, and she'd rather, like, live in a shitty cottage.
Right, yeah, she'd rather have some sort of, I guess, independence, even
Normalcy.
if it means, like, basically living in squalor.
And then that's kind of like where we get more, Matilda's very clever, because I guess, was it like the 6 days she has, like, her montage of her, like, learning her powers?
Yes, where they play Rusted Root and she just levitates things.
Yeah, like, she starts levitating, like, what about, like, when she's an adult, like, she like, pick up, like, battleships and, like, throw them at people?
Yeah, she's a powerful war weapon, that Matilda.
Wait until the government hears about this.
Yeah, wait until frickin' Hawkins Lab hears about this.
I mean, if this could be the 70s.
You mean the 80s, that's...
Or the 80s.
The scariest decade of all, the 80s. Everything was neon and acid wash.
And everyone teased their hair.
See, that's a pretty believable aspect of Matilda's parents, for sure.
What is it? No, what is it? One of my favorite things someone told me was that we're pretty much living in the 80s. The man bun is the millennial mullet.
Oh god, it is. That's so distressing. I mean, the undercut is kind of the reverse mullet. If we're really talking...
Like, what are you talking about? See, the man bun, it's like business in the front, Shogun in the back.
Oh no, that's very bad. That's very, very bad. The worst is when someone doesn't have quite enough hair for a man bun, so it's sort of like this weird little tiny nugget of hair that they have in the back of their... It's like very weird. It's a very bad look. Um, we're alienating all of our listeners with man buns. Can you imagine? I think I'm okay with that.
You know, I can sleep good at night knowing that.
Knowing that we're not specifically catering to man buns.
I mean, yeah, like I said, like she harnesses these powers, and what she does is the most clever thing in the world. And by clever, I mean really stupid. She like asked Miss Honey, like, "Oh, what's your first name?" "Oh, Jenny." "What was your dad's name?" "Magnus." "And what's Trenchbull's name?" "Oh, you know."
Agatha, of course, the most horrifying hag name you could possibly conjure up in your mind.
The next day, they go into class, and Trunchbull's there, and like the chalk starts moving by itself.
Dun, dun, dun. Very spooky.
Like in my brain, I'm thinking of it like if I didn't watch the movie, just imagine like an old 50s movie where you can kind of see the string attached to the chalk.
Yeah, just sort of like a theremin playing in the background, like
Yeah. And like starts writing all these cool things because it turns out that Trenchbull had been stealing money from her dad.
or at least that's like the theory. And so this is like the attempt to kind of push her over the edge.
And well, she committed murder because
or
apparently,
maybe not admitting it, but just kind of like her conscience feeling the guilt of what she's done, so to speak. Like if she really did do it, then she would see this and be freaked out that it's like the vengeful ghost of Miss Honey's dad.
Of course, it works, and Trenchbull like leaves, and like mysteriously, the wool that had been lost is found.
Yeah, I guess like she was so racked with guilt, she left it or something to like appease the ghost that she thought existed, basically. There's a couple ghost gags in this, actually.
I think the movie does it much better, unfortunately. I think
the whole like scary monologue that happens is very creepy.
I think it's much better in the movie.
Mm-hmm.
Same as the ending with Matilda is much better.
Yeah, it's more dramatic, I would say.
But I think that's what it kind of needs.
Mm-hmm. No, I would agree with that.
Same as like, so Trenchbull leaves, and then Miss Honey starts walking Matilda to her house, and I guess her parents are packing. They're going to be leaving to Spain. What was it in? I think in the movie it's South America.
Somewhere where they can escape their crimes.
But as like it turns out that Mr. Wormwood has been buying stolen cars and painting them different colors.
Yeah, and I love how Miss Honey is like not even surprised by that. She's like, "Yeah, your dad is a criminal, clearly." Like
they're leaving to like Spain where
they can't be extradited.
So they leave, but again, I think the movie does a much better job in how like Matilda legitimately like divorces her parents.
I mean, the thing is, she doesn't do anything. She runs away from home and then lives with Miss Honey. She just gets the agreement of her parents because they don't give a crap about her or what happens to her. Like,
well, that's a verbal agreement.
Yeah.
This is a written agreement, which I think they do it much better.
Yeah, that's the difference. I did like that aspect as well. Like you mentioned in the movie that they put it on paper as opposed to just have this random child just like, I'm gonna live here, I guess, and like they're supposed to like take the word of Miss Honey.
The paper that she got was from the library. It was like an
An
adoption paper.
thing. Yeah, she gets adopted.
Yeah.
Which, can you imagine if adoption was that easy? You just like get an adoption paper and you just sign it and then you're adopted. Anyway, that's a whole other thing. Another kind of Lemony Snicket-esque thing that like laws are very loose weave in this universe.
Imagine if the Baudelaires had that.
Yeah, it's like, quick, adopt me, quick, please.
Oh, Mr. Poe, can you sign this paper for us? It's an autograph.
I guess they were like foster children, unfortunate events, right? I never really thought about the legality of it. They were their acting guardians. Anyway, I don't know.
The bank only cared about the money that was most likely stolen.
Yeah, trying to like parse out the laws and unfortunate events is like crazy making, so.
But, yeah, so the book ends with, I think, one of the more heartwarming things in that Miss Honey got what she wanted in the end, and Matilda got what she wanted in the end.
They have a family, the two of them together. The found family trope is very good. I like it. I'm a sucker for it.
I think that trope's fine, because it's like, I like that about, like, you don't need to be blood to have a family.
Yeah, and it's like, it's a sweet message for kids to have, I guess, that like, sometimes your parents can be hurtful and abusive, and you can reassure kids that it's like, I think there's sometimes in certain kids' media to be like, oh, always listen to your parents and whatever, and it's like, that really ignores, the existence of a lot of kids who don't have the best homes. So I think it's like a really nice message to say, you know, you deserve to be with the person who takes care of you the most, who like actually has your well-being in mind, and that person may not be related to you by blood.
Well, I mean, but that's the great thing about, like, no one has to be related to blood to actually, like, love a person.
Yeah, of course not. And it's like very sweet too, because of course Miss Honey has this whole tragic backstory as well, where the two of them feel like a sort of sense of loss, that they never really had a family that they wanted, and now they're like sort of combined family.
It's kind of like with, like, Batman and Alfred.
Yeah, it is a little bit. You're right.
It's like Alfred is the father figure that Bruce Wayne always was robbed of. I mean, there's great examples of this, and I think that's like the most beautiful thing about this. I mean, it's kind of like, yes, Roald Dahl says, you know, adults can be shitty, parents can be terrible.
Yeah.
But there are also a lot of good people in this world that, you know, that will take the time and take care of you.
Yeah, I do find it really interesting that a lot of the good characters, if they're adults, they get characterized as childlike in some ways, like the way that Miss Honey is described.
She's 23.
Like, you know, she's small, she's slight, she's meek. Like there's like certain like there's like language about her that makes her seem less adult like in a weird way. It's like Matilda's a very adult like child and Miss Honey's a very childlike adult, and that's like where they find common ground.
They do that a lot, except I think maybe like the reverse of that might be Grandpa Joe in Charlie and the Chocolate Factory.
Yeah, that's true.
Like there are some examples of this, even like,
though Grandpa Joe is arguably not the best dude.
he's
He's a bit. You could argue that he was kind of a fraudster, but like that's a conspiracy theory. It's like, oh, you got the golden ticket, now I can walk. Okay, sure, sure you can.
I kind of like it more in Tim Burton's version, where it's not like this hyped up song and he just jumps out of bed and they're like, what?
Yeah, he starts like jumping around and dancing, and it's just like all of the other grandparents in bed like, you could walk this whole time? You could have had a job. And there's like his mom like making cabbage soup for 5.
I think the best example actually is not Matilda, that, you know, it's like you can have family without being blood. I actually think James and the Giant Peach is the best version of that.
Oh yeah, because his family is a bunch of bugs he found in a peach.
Yeah.
Which is like, if you could really find your family anywhere. If you could find a bunch of bugs in a peach, anthropomorphized cricket and some shit, then that's your family now. This cricket that can play the violin. Yeah, that's
after the rhinoceros went out down and gobbled your family up.
Yeah. Yeah. Do you think that Dahl has some trauma, maybe?
Yeah, his family got eaten by a rhino.
I feel like that would have been easier on him.
James and Giant Peach is actually an autobiography.
Yeah.
I mean, it's possible one of those is an autobiography.
Yeah, I mean, Spike and Sponge are another really great example of really horrifying guardian figures.
I mean, there's like the interesting theme of like there's bad people, but bad parents are worse.
Yeah, I guess, because they're ruining like the possibility of childhood for a kid. So it's like they're committing the worst crime of all. It's like the worst thing an adult can do is make a bad child, because that makes another terrible adult. It's like the endless cycle of making society terrible. Idealizes like certain aspects of like intellectualism and like being curious and well-read and all of this stuff, but it's more so a story about like being an empathetic, kind person, because he doesn't also really talk down about like the other students, for instance, the other kids.
No, because they actually they learn at different
at different paces. Exactly. He acknowledges that sometimes kids don't know their times tables backwards and forwards the way that Matilda does, and that's fine. They're not, they're demonized by Trunchbull, who's the villain of this story, but they're just kids, and that's okay. They're not evil for not being geniuses. They're sweet and they're kind, just as Matilda is, even if they're not like, prodigies or something.
Yeah, I think that's pretty much the book.
Yeah, that's the book. That's everyone lives happily ever after. They have their sweet little found family. I really think this is an interesting snapshot into the brain of Roald Dahl. But I guess you could say that about most of his books. His children's books are so like specifically moralistic that they're like peering right into the way he thinks about things. He's super didactic about that.
Roald Dahl's like that interesting, like when you write, obviously you're gonna have like a bias because you're gonna write from either experience or like things that you've observed. I guess like writing a book is a lot like peering into a person's soul.
Yeah, and I think that's what's so interesting about trying to like reconcile what he thought about things just in terms of like the fate of humanity. Because there's sometimes there are moments where he comes across as almost optimistic. I think he saw like a very the cliche like children are our future. Like he really saw like hope in kids being better people and like learning to be better than the generation before. But then also he had like this fatalistic idea. I mean, what weirdly enough, the two full-length books that he ever wrote for adults were, one is My Uncle Oswald, which is basically like this big giant parable about this skeezy man who comes up with like this get-rich-quick scheme to like steal, like it's actually like kind of a not safe for work plot, but basically it's like to sell the possibility of like people having children with famous people, and it's like a gross skeevy plot that involves dubious consent, and it's gross, and there's a lot of bad icky things that happen, and it's the whole point is that kind of like bad and terrible, but the way that it's played is very like funny, like this is funny, look how hilarious that adults are, so disgusting. And then you think too also that Roald Dahl was kind of a womanizer himself, so it's like, well, practice what you preach to some extent.
Well, I mean, this is also the man that wrote You Only Live Twice, the James Bond movie where he goes to Japan and James Bond gets surgery to become Japanese.
Yeah, exactly. He wasn't exactly culturally sensitive either, but and then like you look at his other view of adulthood or like humanity or whatever, and you see like something like his other full-length adult book was Sometime Never, A Fable for Supermen, which is a mouthful. It's also out of print, so you probably can't find it anywhere unless you want to read the weird Xerox that I have under my bed. It's like a strange like end of the world story where like the humanity just destroys itself like through like World War III and World War IV, and they just like keep bombing the earth until it's nothing but like a destroyed husk of a planet. Like this is his view of people to some extent.
Roald Dahl is an interesting man, and he does have like a very big, vibrant body of work, which I think is going to last through the ages. And I think we might talk about more of them in the future.
Yeah, we'll see.
But it might be something that we might do later on. We're going to see the response we get with this episode before we talk about, because it's like an interesting thing with like children's authors. They can be a really, especially like now, it's like an interestingly weird, touchy subject when it comes to children's authors, because sometimes they write stuff that might contradict who they are as an individual.
It's true. They're fraught figures for sure, where it's you try to kind of like reconcile like what are they teaching children versus what they actually practice in their everyday life, or like there's like a whole host of complicated things when it comes to any author and any lessons that they're trying to impart on the reader. Like, do you live the sort of dogma that you're preaching in the books that you're writing? Sometimes not. Sometimes it's the opposite,
Yeah, and something that, I think that's like the one thing we'd like to take away with this episode. And like, when you guys finish this episode, think about like all these books and stuff, and it's like trying to distinguish the author from the source material.
Yeah, if you're gonna drive yourself crazy if you try to like figure out exactly what they're trying to say, because people are inherently hypocritical, I guess. They contain weird multitudes about them. I try to like maintain some degree of separation when I read Roald Dahl books, because I do think they are a net positive on the world, even though like as a person he's a complicated dude, and I wouldn't necessarily say he was the best person. But as far as like children reading Matilda all over the world, I think it's a good thing. I'm glad that a story like this exists.
B, do you want to know what book we're going to be reading next month?
I do.
Patreon?
I do.
So next month I got to pick the book. And I'm going to pick a book that I feel like is the reverse of Matilda. It's a book that is very near and dear to my heart, and I think it has one of the greatest movie adaptations of all time. And that is Louis C.K.'s Holes.
That's a good option, actually, because I really loved the movie when I was a kid, and I never got around to reading the book for some reason. But
the book and the movie are so faithful to each other, it's like
they're pretty similar.
Insane. In my opinion, this book kind of represents... The way that I look at Matilda is it's like a person having like a family like kind of cobbled together. Here it is a family that's cobbled together, but like everyone has a story, and it's like everything's connected. And you can have a family without being a family.
Yeah, it's a similar found family thing. That's like super popular in kids' books for sure. Because I do think that like as younger kids start to make like close knit friend groups, they get that sense of like community. So it's like a really popular kind of route to explore. I'm really looking forward to that.
I'm excited because it's one of my favorite books of all time.
Yeah, I think that'll be really fun.
Because digging up them holes, dig
Of
it.
course, yeah.
Digging
Also,
up
the
them
classic
holes,
rap song
you
from the
gotta
Disney
dig
movie.
those holes.
Yeah, oh man, I loved that movie as a kid.
It's so good.
Those lizards kind of freak me out. I feel like most of our podcasts consist of me going, that sure creeped me out as a kid. I'm pretty sure I was just freaked out by a lot of things as a child. I was very easily scared.
So I want to thank you guys for listening to this wonderful episode that, you helped sponsor. And
Yeah.
it's one of those things that we really appreciate. And the one goal of me and B is kind of to, further children's literature in a way that we can try to talk about it from different angles other than that's good, words are good type of stuff. No, we want to talk about them in because we both have wavering opinions on a variety, we might sound like we agree on some things, but we have wavering opinions and we try to respect each other's opinions.
Yeah, I think we both have kind of interesting perspectives on the whole thing. I do think that it's nice to talk to someone about.
I think that's also another takeaway is when you pay for one of these episodes, you're going to be getting different insights into both of our lives as well as these books. So I want to appreciate it, and this is kind of bridging the gap between giving back to you guys for helping us out here and helping sponsor the show so we can keep going on this weird wacky journey.
Yeah, I'm
love hanging out
excited
with my friend B.
for all the bonus episodes. I'm really excited about the Patreon in general to see who's kind of interested in what kind of content. I think it'll push us in kind of an interesting and fun direction. It'll give us the opportunity to talk about things that we may have touched on on the main Radio Camp Half-Blood kind of show, maybe just books that we constantly reference, but we don't necessarily have time to explain.
And everyone also has the power to pick a book if you donate, so it might be a book that neither of us have read before, so we might have fresh eyes, and we might like it, we might hate it.
And we might despise it, and you're just gonna have to deal with that, I guess.
And you know what? That's perfectly fine. There's books that I know that B loves that I absolutely hate.
Wait, what book is that?
There's books... No, I'm trying to think here.
I think you just said that. You're like, I know that B hates some books that I love, that I hate. And it's like, I feel like we pretty much agree on most things. You might like books that I don't like, because you like more horror kind of stuff, so...
Well, we can look at movies, and we can look... We're obviously two different people. We have two different opinions on a lot of the world.
Yeah.
So it's an interesting... But, I think that's the takeaway, I guess, is that we appreciate each other's opinions.
Yeah, I think because we're both coming at it from a sincere place. I'm just honestly the one kind of person I wouldn't be able to talk to is if you were to be very dismissive of children's literature, which of course you're not because you're doing this, but
No, I feel like when it comes to me, I might have an opinion that might be different to somebody, but I want to know from the other person why do you think this way? I want to. That's what I kind of learned because I used to do a lot of debate. I had to do topics where I have to be a for and against. So it has to be trying to figure out the middle ground and figure out which stance I should take before I make a stance.
Yeah, and I feel like I've already learned so much co-hosting with you and with Tyler, just looking at media from a perspective that I may not have considered. Because I do have a very specific approach to the way I look at things. I look at things through a very, literature, English sort of perspective.
Astute.
Like an academic perspective to some extent. Also, I think I'm very informed by social justice stuff, too, that sometimes I can't, get past, upsetting things.
See, that's perfectly acceptable, though, because, that's how you are as an individual. And I believe that is also, especially the where we are in the world right now, we need that. These books aren't changing. It takes people like you and many, including me, either to write these books or have this conversation with people.
Yeah, I think it's way more beneficial to talk about something that may not fit within our current view of things than to just outright dismiss it, because there are things to be gained from
the worst thing you can do is destroy knowledge because it might come back in a different way, but still the same. Like, it's like history repeating itself.
Yeah, you don't need to like dismiss everything just because it's coming from like a less informed or like maybe somewhat more ignorant perspective from like a different time or whatever. I like to like take into consideration like cultural context of how things were made, and also like it's fair to be critical while also being like, oh, here are these good things too. So I hope that that's how we approach these kinds of episodes going forward, especially like doing our bonus episodes. I think we're really going to get more into like those kinds of discussions.
I'm looking forward to, because I think these are the type of discussions that I actually treasure, because, you know, me, a more well-rounded reader and more informed, to have a different opinion.
Yeah, I definitely agree with that. Also, like I think you're gonna introduce me to all sorts of, sorry, I just hit my mic. You're gonna introduce me to all sorts of books that I may have been meaning to read or like I had heard of, but I just kind of never got around to reading. So it's gonna be like a fun experience.
I don't think we need to put where they can find you, but if you want to send us any messages or anything, I think you can find us on radiocamp@gmail.com. If you donate to the Patreon, I believe it lets you have an option to like type in the message that you want from the books, and we'll try to bump those into a list. Like when we actually assemble a list of people donate enough, we're going to have to do it, unfortunately, by a first come, first serve basis. So the first person that donates will get the first pick, and so on and so forth.
I'm looking forward to these Patreon episodes. I jokingly posted today that it's like, finally I recorded a podcast about Roald Dahl. The prophecy has been fulfilled.
We have 7 days before the apocalypse happens.
Yeah, we finally did it. I was finally too on brand.
Oh, actually, I guess the two books we're probably not going to talk about, I'm not sure. I don't think we're going to talk about Goosebumps in R.L. Stein. I don't think we're going to talk about Lemony Snicket.
Yeah, just because that's like redundant to some extent. Like, just listen to our podcast
because we already
about
have
that.
Our bodies
like,
of work.
It'd be kind of silly to do bonus episodes about that.
Yeah, so those are the two. I guess that's the rule. No Lemony Snicket and no R.L. Stein.
Yeah. Or like, yeah, Fear Street. Just go to the podcast that we do about that already. Like, if you have questions about Unfortunate Events, listen to the show that I did, the show that I'm doing currently.
Well, I'm Zach.
I'm B.
And keep staying mortal. Bye.
It's kind of a funny sign off when you're not talking about Percy Jackson.